In May, I read 7 books, and in this video, I will be ranking them from worst to best. Hi and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Kim, and on my channel we are talking about books. May was just another great reading month because I read 7 books, and that means I'm still 7 books ahead on my reading goal for 2026. In this video, I will talk about all the books I've read and I will rank them from worst to best. One of them became one of my all-time favorites, but one of them was actually one of the worst books I've ever read. And let's start off with that last one. And I'm talking about The Caretaker by Marcus Kliewer. This is a newly released psychological thriller. This is also the author by We Used to Live Here. A book that I haven't read myself, but I already have seen so many contradictory opinions about this book, and I was actually very excited for picking up this book because it sounded really promising. The story follows Macy, who recently has lost her job and who is in desperate need for money. Then she stumbles upon this house-sitting job on Craigslist and she decides to take it. But when she arrives at the house, she's giving this bizarre list of rules and rituals that she has to follow, like turning off the light within 10 seconds, beware of the bunnies, and all kinds of other weird stuff. And despite all of that, she decides to stay for the weekend. This sounded to me like the perfect setup for a creepy thriller, and honestly, at first I was completely hooked. The atmosphere was eerie, it was unsettling. Definitely not a book that I would recommend you reading in the dark. But I was constantly wondering where the story was heading. It just felt kind of all over the place, and when the plot started to unfold, I realized that I was not familiar with how this author writes his stories. I don't want to spoil anything on here, so I'm not going to tell you anything further, but I highly recommend you looking into some of the reviews before picking up one of his books, because the style of this writer is either totally up your alley or you will absolutely hate it. And if I had known something more about his storytelling beforehand, I think I would never have picked up this book. In the end, I rated this book 2 stars, and honestly that was only just for the atmosphere and how eerie and suspenseful it sometimes felt, because I kind of loved it until I absolutely hated it. If you have already read this one and you want to talk spoilers, feel free to send me a message because I need to talk about this. The next book I want to talk about is Shield of Sparrows by Devney, and this one might be a little bit controversial. It has been a while since I last read a romantasy book, but I was ready to fully dive in. The sequel to this series also has just been released, and I have seen some people raving about Rights of the Starling, which definitely influenced me to pick up this book. But I don't really know how to feel about this one because the start had me in an absolute chokehold. I was immediately pulled into this world. It was very atmospheric, and I loved how the story opened up with the dynamics between the 2 sisters and their stepmother. But after that, everything just fell apart for me. There was this specific plot twist that I expected very early on, and unfortunately that prediction turned out to be true. And once that happened, it completely deflated the whole story for me because I want to be surprised. I do not want to feel like I have everything figured out from chapter 2. The main character also didn't really work for me. She was really naive. All she was doing was fantasizing and romanticizing these interactions with men that didn't actually happen, and men she didn't even know. If you've read this book, then you might know what I'm talking about. Also, this definitely was a romantasy where the plot was a tell don't show. I want to see action, I want to see events. I don't want the plot to be unraveled by a way that someone is just talking to someone else and explaining everything that's going on. I need things to happen, and I feel like a lot of romantasies are more like tell don't show lately, and this was definitely one. So it started off strong, but it didn't keep momentum for me, and therefore I rated this book 3 stars, and I don't think I will continue this series. Up next is That's Not My Name by Megan Lally. This is also the book of the month for our book club, and we will be discussing this book into more depth next week because we are having a bookish weekend and I'm very excited for that. This is another psychological thriller, but it's way more YA than the previous one, The Caretaker by Marcus Kliewer. This story follows along a girl who is found in a ditch and she doesn't remember anything. She doesn't know her name, she doesn't know who she is, and she doesn't remember the man who is picking her up from the police station who claims to be her father. From there on, she slowly starts to recover pieces from her memory while she is trying to figure out what has happened to her. So the premise sounded really promising and I really like the concept of this book. However, to my personal taste, it leaned away too much into YA, which also made a lot of the twists feel quite predictable. I found myself seeing some of the major reveals fairly early on in the story. You still really want to know what happened, but once the story is unraveling and I'm not surprised anymore, yeah, well. That said, I did enjoy reading this book. It's very fast paced and really easy to get through, but I think that if you have read this one and you've enjoyed this one, then I really need you to pick up A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. It has the same vibes, the same energy, but Holly Jackson is the queen of plot twists. So overall, enjoyed this story. I rated it 3 stars, which means it's on the 5th place of my ranking. Then we are going back into the rabbit hole of weird girl fiction because I read Threadwife by Saratoga Schaefer. This book immediately pushes a very uncomfortable question. Are we having children because of the experience of it, or just for the sake of social media? So at the center of this story is this woman who is desperate to become a mother, and she's trying to live up to the expectations of her role in marriage, in society, and the online image of perfection. But her husband cannot or maybe will not give her a child, so she ends up being conflicted in this pregnancy pact with a demon that's living in her garden. What really stood out is how this story tied motherhood to expectations and performance and identity. And this book felt way less of a satire on threadwife culture, such as the story in Yesteryear, but way more of how the idea of motherhood can become such an obsession that it just overrules everything else. There's also this really strong undercurrent about how children literally consume their parents, especially mothers, and about all the societal expectations about fertility and marriage and, well, actually the perfect picture. What I liked the most about this story is the evolution of the main character. There are moments where she really is starting to question her own beliefs, and that shift in perspective felt like the strongest part of this book to me. So yes, this was unsettling, this was weird, and this fits perfectly into the weird girl genre. And I rated this book 3 stars. But compared to the previous other 3-star books, this book was way more memorable. Then I read The Reckoning, book 3 in the Zodiac Academy series. I finally stepped back into this world. I have been putting this book off for way too long. Getting back into this world was kind of a struggle at first because I just keep on mixing up all of the errors, like the bad boys in this story, which kind of made it hard to lock into the character dynamics immediately. If you know this series, then you may know that it's completely unhinged in the best way possible. Think Harry Potter on crack with Pegasus chaos and very questionable life choices. It makes absolutely no sense at times, but it's just extremely addictive. I did really enjoy stepping back into this world, and yes, I'm still team Lance Orion, despite the very controversial teacher-student affair that comes along with that. Like I said, I did struggle a bit in the beginning. The story didn't immediately hook me. It kind of clicked when I was like halfway through. But when I became properly invested in the story, I just wanted to pick up the book with every spare moment that I had. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars. And next up is the Rootless Boys series. This is kind of a spin-off series about the heirs, so I hope that with reading those 5 books that I will get a clearer grip on who is who in this universe. The next book I read on my Kindle, Dissection of a Murder by Jo Murray. This was my very first time reading a legal thriller, and I didn't expect that I would enjoy this so much. If you like series like How to Get Away with Murder, The Lincoln Lawyer and Suits, then this is exactly up your alley. High stakes legal drama, fast paced, and the story evolves way more around strategy than just solving a murder. The story follows Lila, and Lila is a criminal defense lawyer, and she ends up defending Jack, who is accused of murdering a judge. And from there on, the legal web only gets more complicated because the prosecutor is Julian, and Julian was once Lila's mentor, but now he is her husband. So what I really liked about this story is how the story was structured. You are getting multiple POVs, and not only by the defendant and the criminal lawyer, but also a mystery witness. That makes the story feel very layered and constantly shifting instead of staying locked in this one perspective. So another thing that stood out to me was that it wasn't a classical whodidit mystery, because very early on in the story we have a suspect that is arrested, and now we have to prove his innocence in a trial setting. I really enjoyed this setup and this storytelling style. It felt really smart and structured and very strongly plotted. I gave this book 4 stars, and the only reason it didn't get 5 stars is that somehow I knew how the story would unravel. That being said, the execution and the actual twists are still very, very smart. And my very, very last read is also my top read, which is Japanese Gothic by Kylie Lee Baker. I already posted a very more in-depth and extensive review here on my channel, but I'm still going to go over it very quickly and tell you what I think about this book. So this is a psychological horror story, and I read this in under 48 hours because I just couldn't put it down. It was so addictive. It's atmospheric, it's eerie, it's suspenseful, and at the same time it's very emotional immersive. This story follows along 2 timelines, and in 2026 we follow along Lee, and Lee has just murdered his roommate, but he can't fully remember why he did it, and he can't remember where he put the body because Lee is addicted to sleeping pills. And then he decides to flee to his father's house in Japan. In the second timeline we are following along San, who's living in the late 1800s and is being raised according very strict samurai rules in a time in Japan with a large political shift. Both of these timelines are connected through place, but also by themes like isolation, survival, and obedience. What stood out the most to me is the emotional core of this story. Both of these characters are shaped and damaged by the constant parental expectations, and they are constantly sacrificing themselves just to be considered to be enough. What I also really loved about this book is how contradictory the writing felt, because sometimes it was very beautiful and lyrical, and then suddenly very visceral and disturbing. Overall, I absolutely loved this story, but it's not a light read. It's very heavy in emotion and it can be very dark. But if you like a psychological horror with very strong atmosphere but also emotional depth, then this book is definitely for you. So yes, this was absolutely a 5-star read for me. So these were all the books I've read in the month of May. If you're still here at the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear from you guys what your favorite book of the month was. Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.